Hello again. Now we're going to read another story of Alfie and Annie Rose's big storybook. This is called Mr. McNally's Hat. One morning, Mummy took Alfie across the street to Mrs. McNally's house to be looked after by Mrs. McNally while she, Mummy, and Annie Rose went to see the doctor. Mrs. McNally was a very busy person. She did a lot of cleaning, dusting and polishing and vacuuming. She cleaned her windows until they sparkled and shone. That morning Mrs. McNally was having a good clear out, as you call it. So she and Alfie went upstairs, and Alfie pushed her toy cars about on the bedroom floor while Mrs. McNally pulled everything out of the big cupboard. She folded the shirts and trousers carefully and put them on the bed, and then she started to sort out the rest of the things. Well, that is something I've been doing too, clearing up the cupboards, getting all the clothes for the summer ready. Now Alfie stopped playing and helped her put the clothes in different piles. When they found a pair of Mrs. McNally's socks or gloves, they put them together, and when they found an odd sock or glove, they put them in another pile, until they found the pair for it. Soon the whole floor, as well as the bed, was covered with neat piles of matching clothes. Then, from the very back of the cupboard, Mrs. McNally brought out a big, large black hat. "Oh, goodness, there's that awful hat," she said, dusting it off with her sleeve and holding it up in the light. There it is. Can you see it? There are all the piles of clothes neatly together. Oh, I think Alfie likes that hat. The hat looked quite new. Mrs. McNally told Alfie that Mr. McNally bought it to wear it to a special occasion, and that he paid a lot of money for it. He thought he would give him height, said Mrs. McNally, make him look bigger. But she didn't think that the hat suited Mr. McNally at all, so it had hung unworn on the peg in the hall for a long time, until in the end she'd taken it down and put it at the very back of the cupboard, where she hoped Mr. McNally would forget about it. And he had. Alfie thought that Mr. McNally's hat was very good hat indeed. He tried it on in front of the big mirror. At first he couldn't see anything at all because it was that big. But when he pushed it up again, he could see just that and saw himself in the mirror. Can you see? That's a brilliant hat, isn't it? We've got one or two of those in the preschool, haven't we, that you use for dressing up? While Mrs. McNally put all the clothes tidily back into the cupboard, Alfie walked up and down in his hat. When Mum came to collect him, Mrs. McNally said he'd been such a good, helpful boy all morning that if he liked, he could take the hat home with him and keep it. Alfie thanked Mrs. McNally and put all his cars in the hat to carry them back across the street. There is Mummy picking him up. And he's allowed and he's saying goodbye to Mrs. McNally. Alfie liked Mr. McNally's hat so much he wore it the rest of the day. It had some dents in it, but he punched them out so that the top was all smooth and rounded. At bedtime he put the hat carefully at the bottom of his bed. The next day he wore the hat to nursery school, and Mrs. Palmer, his teacher, said that it was such a beautiful hat it would be safer if Alfie hung it up with the coats while they were playing inside. There he is, in the evening, with his hat at the back of his bed. And there he is the next morning in nursery. But when it was time to go outside in the yard, where there were climbing frames and slides and trucks and trolleys, Alfie put the hat on again, and all the children crowded round, and Alfie let them take turns trying it on. Then they invented a very good game in which the person who was wearing the hat chased about and ran after all the other people, and if someone got caught, then it was their turn to wear the hat. Oh, that sounds like playing it, doesn't it? We like playing that as well in the preschool, running outside, catching each other. For the next few days, Alfie wore the hat a lot, and when he got tired of wearing it, he put it at the bottom of his toy cupboard where he kept his special things. Annie Rose found it, and she made it into a bed for her lamb. But soon they both forgot about the hat altogether. There they are, playing with it, and there she made it into a bed for her little lamb. That's a good idea, isn't it? One of Alfie's very best friends was the milkman. Alfie liked to watch out for him coming up the street in his milk float, and when he came whistling up the steps, he would leave the milk on the doorstep of Alfie's house. Then Alfie would wave from the window, and the milkman always waved back. And when Mummy and Alfie met him out delivering milk around the neighbourhood, he would call out, "Watcha, mate? How's yourself?" And Alfie would call back, "Fine, thanks, mate." Then the milkman would give a thumbs up, an OK sign, as he drove on. There he is. He sounds like a jolly fella, doesn't he? Have you got a milkman like this? I used to get the milk delivered when my children were small. I remember him having a milk float like that. In the cold weather, the milkman sometimes wore a woolly hat, but the rest of the time he didn't wear anything on his head at all. One wet morning, when the rain was pouring down, Alfie looked out of the window and saw the milkman running up the steps of their house with his hair soaking down and plastered down his forehead. The raindrops were dripping down his nose and off the end of his beard. Then Alfie had a very kind thought. There he is in the rain. Can you see him? Very, very bad rain. A bit like it rained last night. But you were probably fast asleep then. I hope so. While Mummy was paying the milkman, where Alfie went up to his toy box, and out of this toy cupboard he brought out Mr. McNally's black hat. He ran back to the door. "Hey, here's a present for you," he said, holding it out. "It will keep your head dry." "Thanks a lot," said the milkman, looking at the hat. "That's a good hat, that is." Then he clapped it on his head and went off down the steps and drove off. Can you see him? There is Alfie giving it to him. And there he is, walking back to his milk float. But the next time Alfie saw the milkman, he wasn't wearing his hat, nor the time after that. "Doesn't he like the hat I gave him?" Alfie asked his mum anxiously. But Mummy said, "I'm sure he likes it a lot. It's just that the weather's been fine, and I expect he's keeping it for a rainy day." The next time it rained, Alfie was at the window waiting for the milkman to come up the street. But when at last the milk float stopped outside Alfie's house and the milkman came up the stairs, he still wasn't wearing the hat. "Oh, what happened to the hat?" There's Alfie waiting for him, watching. Then Alfie was so upset he burst out into tears. And when the milkman saw his sad face at the window, he rang the doorbell, even though it wasn't payday. Mummy and Alfie hurried to the door. "What's up, mate?" said the milkman to Alfie. You aren't wearing the hat I gave you," sobbed Alfie. The milkman said, "Come along with me and I'll show you why not." There is Alfie really upset. And there's the milkman at the door with Annie Rose standing behind Mummy's skirt, a bit scared. I wonder what happened with the hat. Mummy helped Alfie to put on his mackintosh and his boots and rain hat, and then he and the milkman went outside into the street where the milk float was. Then the milkman hoisted Alfie up and plumped him down onto the driver's seat. There they are, walking up to the milk float. Can you see? All dressed, ready for the rain. With his yellow boots that he goes like splashing in the park with. Splish, splash, splosh. There, on the seat, was the hat. Alfie looked inside the hat. Guess what he saw? A little puppy, curled up fast asleep, with his paws over his nose. He had floppy ears and a black tail. "He's a stray," the milkman told Alfie. "A lady up the street found him on the doorstep, all wet and shivering. So I took him with me." Alfie touched the puppy very gently. He felt so firm and warm. He just got into the hat and settled down. I thought he would sleep there as he'd been there his whole life, said the milkman. Me and the wife have been thinking about getting a dog, and if no one asks for him, I will keep him. Just then the puppy opened up one of his eyes and licked Alfie's hand. And at that moment, Alfie could not think of a better use for Mr. McNally's hat. There is the puppy sleeping in the hat. Isn't that a good idea? What a nice end of the story, isn't it? I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.